Hi, it's Friday, November 7th, and we're tracking Tropical Storm Fung-Wong. Sitting in the open tropical Pacific today, the system is still a broad system, still gradually organizing, but it's forecast to become a significant typhoon as it tracks towards the west-northwest for the next few days, and a landfall is very likely now in the northern Philippines as a strong typhoon, likely in the time frame of late Sunday night or early on Monday morning local time. And so far, the system really has not been rapidly intensifying. We talked about for the past few days that it was not going to be expected, as this has a very broad influence across the Pacific. And really, the system has at times been competing with the Philippines to see which one's going to be larger, the landmass or the storms. And so that has meant that the system has not really been able to intensify at a very quick pace, but it has been making gradual progress. And for the past 2 days, we've seen a marketable improvement in convection across the entire area of low pressure at the surface. And in response, we've seen at the surface the whole circulation tighten up comparatively to where it was a couple of days ago. And the effects of this are now being seen this morning. If we take a look at the closer view visible imagery, we'll see that across the center of the storm, we've got more deep convection firing in this part of the storm. And not only that, but they're also wrapping around in a pretty quick fashion, much quicker than they were a couple of days ago, around the center of the storm. And if we take a look beneath the clouds through a microwave pass that we got a couple of hours ago, you'll see that this is trying to form the start of a formative inner core structure in the center of the storm. Now, this is pretty broad, and it's likely in the early stages of being built, so this is not likely to be the final size of it. It will likely contract with time, but nonetheless, this is progress, and so this signifies that the forecast is still on track for the system to become a significant typhoon going into this weekend as it tracks towards the northwest. As the environment is forecast to remain generally favorable, it may get a little bit more unfavorable near landfall in the Philippines, and we'll talk about that in just a moment. Now we can see how this progression goes if we look at the HAFS model, and you can see again the depiction on the model with this very broad wind field and still trying to work itself to make it more compact in the center of the storm. But as we go throughout the day today, we see that happen with all of those deeper bursts happening near the center of the storm. And we start to see the formative inner core start to be built and complete by Friday night into Saturday morning. And once this is done, then the system will likely be able to intensify at a more quick to rapid pace. And we see this on the model. Up to this point, it's really just been gradually organizing. But now once this inner core structure is built, look at the red number in the middle. That starts to decrease at a more rapid pace, down to the 940s and down to the 930s. And the winds come up in response to that to near super typhoon force by the time it's getting close to the Philippines. And this is a pretty well agreed upon idea by much of the model guidance we have today, the HAPS-A, the HWRF, the global models of the GFS and European, and even some AI ensembles like Google DeepMind, which is still being consistent on showing a Category 4 or Category 5 equivalent typhoon at peak. Now, one thing that will be important to watch in the short term to determine exactly how strong the system can get is exactly how big this core is once it is complete. As I alluded to, this core alone is pretty broad, and what we've seen, especially in the HAFS model forecast, is a decrease in the maximum winds on its forecast because a larger eye will tend to struggle to get more high intensities of Category 5 plus comparatively to a very small core. So the runs a few days ago where the HAFS model had it getting to 150, 160 knots, those have come down significantly with this larger core size, but there is still some discrepancy in model guidance onto exactly how large the core is going to be. But not just that, but it's also going to be important to determining the widespread scale of the impacts. You'll see that this is a broader core, so the typhoon force winds are over a broader zone. And if we have any structural changes over the next few days, like eyeball replacement cycles, which tend to increase the size of the storm, that may increase further the typhoon force and tropical storm force wind field and bring those conditions to a larger area across the Philippines. And you can see as we near landfall, I mean, this is a very large typhoon force wind field, but not just that. Look at the whites and going into pinks here near the eye wall. those are the winds that are of strong to super typhoon force. And note how it's not just kept to a very small area like you would normally expect for a typhoon. It's across a pretty broad expanse. And so as we move into landfall Luzon, we may be talking about a large population area that may be dealing with very strong typhoon force winds. And of course, that also brings concerns of storm surge being high across a larger area near and north of where the center makes landfall eventually in the northern Philippines. Now, some good news is that the wind shear right now is low, but the wind shear is forecast to increase as we get towards landfall in the northern Philippines. We could take a look at this very well if we look at the HAFS model upper level flow plot. So by this point, this is out to Sunday morning or Sunday afternoon local time, and the storm is now nearing landfall in Luzon. And one thing we've seen in the trends of the models over the past day is a tendency to have stronger shear as we near landfall here. And the best thing that I can tell of what's happening here is if we go back a couple of runs, you'll see the western edge of this ridge was not as strong as it was on current runs. The ridge over Taiwan has been trending a little bit stronger in recent runs of the HAFS model. And this is not just in the HAFS model, but also other models like the GFS and the European. The net effect of this, it has two primary effects. The first one is that because this high pressure center is now stronger, it forces a storm to stay further south. So that is why today I mentioned that it's now very likely that we have a landfall here in Luzon. This is now pushing it further south. So you can see comparatively to even just a day ago, we're now talking about southeast or central coasts of Luzon getting landfall comparatively to, say, the islands further north or the northeast coast getting landfall. Now, the other effect this has is you'll see a little bit of an increase in the easterly flow across this part of the Philippine Sea and the South China Sea by this point. And this is netting a stronger shear than prior forecasts had shown. And if we take a look at the sounding from the GFS as we near landfall, these valleys are actually getting pretty significant. And one analog I used for the system with the speed shear that we had was Hurricane Beryl in 2024. Now, one thing about that is that even in speed shear, if it gets too high, like 25, 30 knots plus, that will cause disruption significantly no matter the storm. And we're seeing that today depicted on the GFS model. You can see that now, because of that ridge being stronger further north, we've got some stronger flow in the mid to upper levels of the troposphere. In fact, this barb here at around 300 millibars, that's 40 knots of flow at the top of the troposphere, comparatively to the surface where we've got really light flow, maybe about 5 knots at the surface. So that is causing a significant speed shear. Now, the GFS is also showing potential for some significant vertical shear too. It has more southerly flow near the surface comparatively to strong easterly flow in the mid to upper levels. This has been a bit more of a discrepancy between models, but nonetheless, with this increase in the flow in the mid to upper levels, it's likely to cause an increase in vertical shear. And we can see it clearly here as well if we look at the HAFS model sounding. You can see the vertical aspect is not nearly as significant. We don't have due southerly flow in the southern or the lower part of the troposphere, but we still see these 30 to 35 knot winds in the mid to upper level parts of the atmosphere. And the shear, even in deep layer, is now getting to significant levels of 20 to 25 knots. And the effect of this is that now this is going to try and shear the system more hard on the way to landfall. And the hope is that this might be able to actually disrupt the system's intensity. It will likely do that, but also now cause some weakening as we head towards landfall. And you can see in this little thumbnail here the disruption that is occurring on the GFS model, where this is showing you the mid-level relative humidity, and you'll see that we have deeper greens on the southwestern and western sides of the storm comparatively to this eastern side. That's showing you that because of this stronger flow in the mid to upper levels, the mid-level circulation is trying to be pushed west faster than the surface center. So you start to get the vortex tilted with height. And for a hurricane, that's not good. For a strong hurricane like this, you want those centers to be vertically stacked with height, not tilted. And so if the center does get significantly tilted, that can cause significant weakening prior to landfall. Now, unfortunately, I don't think that we're going to see a drastic or rapid weakening pace occur before landfall. Even on the HAFS model, for example, we see that shear increase even to these, moderate values of 20 to 25 knots. But this is still a very strong typhoon by the time it comes in. And one aspect of this to keep in mind is that larger storms can tend to be a little bit more resilient to the impacts of shear. So while eventually it may disrupt the system significantly, it may take more time. And one downside of the stronger mid to upper level flow is it is going to be accelerating the storm's forward motion towards the west. So it may mean that it makes landfall before the shear has a chance to really disrupt the system significantly. And so unfortunately, even with this new information from model guidance, it's unlikely to cause a rapid weakening trend, and we're probably still going to be looking at a strong and large typhoon coming into Luzon late Sunday into Monday morning. And that's exactly what's shown here on the HAFS model and what is still shown on the Pagasa forecast today. You can see the system intensifying into a typhoon later today and becoming a super typhoon by Sunday morning or Saturday night as it passes very close to the Philippines by this point. And they have it remaining a super typhoon all the way up to landfall, again, highlighting that shear is not likely to make a rapid change in the intensity. So preparations should still be as if we're going to be looking at a super typhoon coming in here to the Philippines. And note as well how large the wind field is. Now, we may still see it contract some for the next few days, but you can see in the HAFS model, the tropical storm force wind field is still very broad here. And so, like I mentioned, we're probably going to be seeing a wide expanse of Luzon deal with the impacts of typhoon force winds and strong tropical storm force winds. But also the storm surge may be significant along a large portion of this eastern coast, generally north of where the center makes landfall. That will be the main determining factor for who gets the maximum surge. Now, another issue, like we've talked about, is that once the system gets to the Philippines, it is going to be starting to make a turn to the north. And now models have come to agreement that it's likely to occur after the Philippines. However, one thing that I noted yesterday is that once the storm starts to make this turn, you'll note that it does slow down. And so that means that we could see a prolonged period of heavy rainfall occur after all the winds have calmed down. So we may see a prolonged impact of this storm even after the core passes well towards the northwest. And this may also be the case for areas like Taiwan further north, because we have this very broad expanse, very broad influence. And so with the high terrain there, we could get very heavy rainfall well in advance of the eye of the typhoon. And this is shown very well if we look at the European ensemble rainfall forecast. This is over the next 7 days. And you'll see that here's the track of the typhoon. And here in Luzon, we have a broad zone of 150 millimeters plus, and especially in some of the higher terrain here on both sides of the coast in the South China Sea and the Philippine Sea, we've got rainfall totals 200, 300, potentially 400 millimeters in totals at the end of this thing. And this only goes out through day 7. By this point, the system is still slowly making this turn, so we could see even more rainfall on top of this as further outer bands rotate in. But also note how it's not just the Philippines. Again, this system has a very broad influence, and we can see this very clearly this morning in the visible loop. And so even as it makes this turn over the South China Sea, we may also have those outer bands rotate into Taiwan. And especially with all the high terrain that we have here across this island, we may see very heavy rainfall totals fall as a result of that. And you can see the totals here are getting very similar to what we're seeing in Luzon on this European ensemble mean. And one thing I should note is this is an ensemble mean. The European ensemble has 51 members, so 51 different runs, all run a little bit differently to give you 51 different possible scenarios of how the system could go. And the average of all of those is showing heavy rainfall across these. And so my concern is high for flooding issues in the Philippines and Taiwan, especially with the high terrain that we have in those places after the storm begins to weaken. But of course, the immediate issue towards landfall will be the strong, potentially super typhoon force winds and storm surge. And again, key message really that this is likely to be a significant impact for the Philippines going into early parts of next week. And I'll of course continue to have videos on this for the next several days as it tracks towards the west northwest. And I'll leave links to Pagasa and other local weather offices that I can find at the top of the description so you can stay updated with local information to you on how you can prepare ahead of the storm. That's all that I've got for today. Stay safe in the Mariana Islands. I know I didn't really talk about that all too much, but we do have the wind field likely impacting these islands a little bit today, and we could see some outer bands rotate in, and that could cause some tropical storm force winds and some localized flooding there. So stay safe as that system impacts there. And again, I'll have more videos on this progressively for the next several days as it tracks towards the west-northwest. That's all for now. Thanks for watching.